In this movie I want to talk about wall textures and components and how you apply the textures to them. Now, as you should know, walls can have components, and the components can be the internal skin, they could be a cavity, and in this case I've given the cavity a texture, but normally that component would probably be invisible for a cavity wall, but you may have it filled with insulation, so that component could represent insulation, for example. And the inner component has a different texture to the outer component here, or the left and the right. So a wall can have a style. This wall has a style, and this wall has a style. This wall has no style. You can see here it's unstyled, but an unstyled wall can still have components. And on a wall by wall, or if you select a bunch of walls, you can manually edit the components, and on a component by component basis, edit the component, give it a texture, and have that texture applied to the wall on a component by component basis. Now, you can also define those textures of a component in a wall style, and we'll look at that in a moment. Now, if we look at the render tab here, you'll see the mode option here says by component. So you can choose whether you are using the components to texture the wall or whether you just want to do the wall overall. So you can see that when I set this mode to by object, then all of the component textures get hidden. And this applies to whether or not the wall is styled or not. So here is an unstyled wall. We did apply one texture to one component so that we can switch that on and off by this control here. Likewise, for this styled wall, the wall style has textures on the components, so setting the mode to by component or by object will turn that on and off. So once we set it to by object, then it's wanting me to make the choices for the textures right here in the render tab of the Object Info palette. When we're choosing by component, then it's going to use the components that were defined in the wall style. So coming back to a wall that has components that we have set to by object, then walls have a left side and a right side, and you will notice that when you're in a top plan view, you see this little arrow at the start of the wall, and if you stand at that arrow and look towards the end of the wall, then the left hand side of the wall is on your left and the right hand side of the wall is on your right. So going back to that 3D view again, the back side of this wall is the left and the right side of this wall is the face that we can see. When you do overall mode, by object, when you do the mode by object, all of the left faces of every component will get the same texture. So we have the mode, we then have the part. We can choose overall, left, right, start cap, end cap, top, bottom, holes. So overall is currently controlling all of these things here. You can see it says from overall, end cap from overall, top from overall. So if I were to change or to set the texture of overall here to this here, then all of those things that are listed below the grey line here are going to get the texture from the overall. So that's the top, the bottom, the end cap, the start cap, and any holes in the wall. So if I want to put a texture on the right hand side of the wall, then what I need to do is to choose right and then choose the texture that I want to put on the right side of the wall, and let's choose a different texture here. So you can now see that every component in this wall, the right face of every component in this wall has received that texture. Currently there's no texture on the left-hand side of this wall. But if we were to choose left and pick a texture, and I'll pick something that's hopefully a bit lighter. Let's try that. Oh, it was a bit darker, but still you can see that it's different. So you can see there's a different texture on the left-hand side of the wall to the right-hand side of the wall. So that's how you can control the textures on the different parts of the wall, and that's a fairly gross way of doing it, but often it's all you need. Other times you will want to control the wall, the textures on a wall component by component, and when you do this, then it's important that you define the wall style correctly. So let's take a look at the wall style. If we look at the shape tab here, we can see that the style on this is existing concrete block cavity 270. Let's not worry too much about the name, but here is this wall style here. So let's edit this wall style and take a look at the texturing within the wall style. So there were 3 components, a 110, a 50 and a 110, and if we select the external concrete, so that would be this one here, and we choose edit, you can see that the texture has been set in the wall style here. The options are no texture, to use class texture, in which case it will use the texture that's applied to this particular class up here. For this particular class here that we're using on this wall, which is wall component masonry. So I could apply the texture via that class, or I can just directly choose the texture here, and that's what we're doing. So this has that texture applied to it. The cavity has a plywood veneer texture applied to it, and this has another texture applied to it. Now, so we've done that, and if we look at the insertion options here, this is going to tie back into the options that we saw here for the mode. Just cancel out of that and just switch back to the render tab. So what we're talking about here is the mode, whether it's by component or by object. So currently it's set to by component, and when we edit the wall style in the insertion options, we can choose whether it uses the component textures, in which case when you draw the wall it will automatically get the component textures. Alternatively, you can choose to use the object textures and not apply the component textures, in which case you can either set those textures here for overall, just like we were doing before, start cap, end cap and so on. So you can set those textures all up using no texture, class texture or whatever, or you can use the component textures. And if you use the component textures, then the textures that you define for the components are going to be applied the moment the wall has completed drawing. So it is easy for this to get tricky and for things not to appear. So the key things are that you look at how the textures are being applied, either by component or by object. And if you had left this on use object textures and you then drew the wall as we've done here, you're then going to have to come to the object info palette and change the mode to use by component. Conversely, if we edit this wall style again and switch that back to component, use component textures, and we were then to draw a wall using that wall style, you'll see that it will instantly have those textures because that was the default setting for the wall. Now, one other thing that I just wanted to talk about, if we look at this this wall here, note that there's this button here that says revert to overall. If you wanted just to apply one texture to the whole wall, then you can choose the part, in this case left, and you can say please just make that to be controlled by the overall. And you'll now see, if we look at our part list, that the left has dropped down to below this grey line here. So the left is now being controlled by the overall texture. And if we did that to the right as well, so choose right from this, then click revert to overall. Now you'll see that all of the wall, the holes, the bottom, the top, the end, right, etc., left, are all being controlled with one single option. So if I were to change the texture on that to something different, then it's going to change every surface of the wall. And conversely, if I want to change the left back to something different, then I can just choose it from the list, and it's then going to pop up to above the grey line. Let's actually do that to right, because we'll see that, and then I can choose a different texture for that side of the wall. So that's how you can move options from the bottom up to the top by using this revert to overall option here. So hopefully I haven't confused you too much by that explanation, and if you play with it a bit, I'm sure you'll get the hang of how it works.